Government fails, the world's off its rails, leaders are whacked, democracy is under attack. It's time to get smart, folks, time to get real. Let's cut through the crap, tell us how you feel. Let's pull back the curtain and open the door. Get some stuff that's not bought and paid for. Let's herd border to border, coast to coast. Let's cue the talent, let's meet the host. Podcast by George.
Hello, hi, how are you? Welcome back to Podcast by George. In the middle of a coronavirus, COVID-19 sweeping the nation, affecting the home state. Here in Hawkeye land greatly, it's a minute-by-minute, day-by-day thing that's dominating the news cycle as well. It should. Stay tuned. Pay attention. I tell folks, shelter safe and well, and watch Podcast by George. I mean, that's a good thing to do. Get caught up on your reading. That's what I'm doing. And check the news programs and podcasts and become better informed. And that's all well and good. One of the big news cycles, and it's tied to this coronavirus things, one of the big news cycle stories, I should say, is the bailout for 2020. And it's kind of tied to coronavirus, although after looking at it, when it got released, I kind of wondered if it actually was. This is something that passed the U.S. Senate 96-0. It just passed the House. It went to Trump, signed, of course. It's becoming law, and it's going out there. And it passed the Senate 96-0. And, you know, when this thing was being deliberated upon, and it wasn't much of a deliberation, I was reminded, looking at this, when they talk about that $1,200 that each U.S. American is going to get. I look at that, every U.S. citizen is going to get. I look at that and I think, okay, anytime somebody offers you something up front, be suspicious. And I'll tell you why. If you understand how confidence games work. And there's an excellent movie called House of Games. Joe Montana is the star of that, and he's a confidence man. And he explains in the movie that the way a con works, most people think a con man takes things from you. Well, yeah, but not in the way that you think. What they really do is they give you something. It always starts with them giving you something. And so when you see this $1,200 and the unemployment benefits and all that, and I thought, yeah, okay. I remember 2008. I remember that bailout. I remember how that benefited big business and how 9 million Americans lost their homes, didn't get any debt forgiveness, got screwed basically. They're not going to do that again, are they? Yeah, pretty much. I think that's what they did. And I thought, my God. And there's all kinds of commentary on it. Not a lot of neo-lib support, a lot of neo-con support. You know, that's kind of between the goalposts, kind of what you would expect. And I'm looking for progressive commentary. I'm looking for my progressive friends. I'm looking for progressive support in the Congress. I was looking for Bernie. He made a speech on the unemployment part of it, which we can talk about later. Elizabeth Warren was MIA, from what I could tell. AOC in the House pitched a fit and then voted for it. And I'm just not seeing much on the progressive side like usual. I feel like a voice in the wilderness. I got to get somebody on my podcast. I got to get a fellow progressive in here to talk about this. And that's where we're at today. And that's who we want to welcome in here. It's Brian McLean. And Brian, I want to introduce you to the viewers and thank you for coming on Podcast by George.
Hi, thanks, George. Thanks for having me.
Brian McLean's a leader in the progressive movement here in Iowa, and he is the owner of Progressive Voice of Iowa, and you can find that on the web. Brian, give us your take, and it's early on. I mean, the onion is just being peeled back on this thing, but again, from my perspective, maybe you disagree, but I'm looking at this onion, and I'm thinking it's a pretty stinky one.
Well, first of all, I wanted to go ahead and address one part of it, which I'm seeing a lot of people go after Sanders and go after AOC for voting for this bill. And trust me, yes, there is a bailout in here. There's a massive corporate bailout in all this. But also included in that was unemployment benefits that would have never been able to pass a McConnell Senate. I'm doubtful it would have been able to pass a majority Democrat Senate. this was a massive win for progressives right here, and Bernie ended up using the Republicans' greed against them in order to get this through. I think that it was a good win, but at the same time, yeah, we're right back to where we were with the bailouts. It's always used. The phrase is always used against socialism. Is the problem with socialism is you run out of other people's money. Well, that's what we got right here with capitalism. Is we have capitalism, we have corporations that should be solvent, completely solvent, be able to weather a couple of weeks of lower profits, not complete cut off of business, but lower profits. But somehow they're needing billions and billions of our money, of our tax dollars, pulled out of our infrastructure, pulled out of what should be going towards healthcare, pulled out of food stamps and everything else to keep them running. So yeah, it was a fighting for every bit of ground we got, fighting for every bit of ground that we need and we can get. And unfortunately, this is a pretty big. This is a block grant to the executive branch. It's literally handing over the purse strings over to the executive branch on a limited basis. But who says they're not going to try and do this again sometime in the near future?
Well, it looks like a permanent restructuring, a permanent refinancing of America. It goes back to this kind of bait and switch, this thing I was talking about at the beginning with this confidence game. It's kind of like if you see a magic act, it's always, what? Here, look at my left hand.
Yeah. And
then, yeah, I mean, that's kind of what this is like. And folks, what Brian was talking about with this criticism of Bernie on this bill, the Republicans, of course, they couldn't stand giving that unemployment insurance that he mentioned to Americans. They didn't want to benefit poor people. I mean, that is kind of their, how their modus operandi. And so they put up an amendment to block that. Now, here's the thing. Trump and Mnuchin said they weren't interested in that amendment. They weren't interested in blocking that unemployment insurance. So a lot of people looked at that and said, okay, that's going to fail. That's just grandstanding by the Republicans to play to their base that they want to deny poor people things. And the Democrats didn't need to really do much on that at all. Now, Bernie spoke on that, as Brian mentioned, but it did fail. It didn't get through, didn't have a chance. And, of course, then the overall package passed 96-0. And Brian, I got to share this with folks. I'm reading Lee Camp's new book, and he has a description in here. He talks about at the beginning of the very book about how $21 trillion has gone missing from the Department of Defense and HUD that was budgeted by Congress, a much lower amount, and $21 trillion is unaccounted for. Now, he does a description. I just want to read this because it's very brief, but this is great. He says, picture a stack of money. Now, imagine that stack of dollars is all $1,000 bills. Each bill says $1,000 on it, folks. How high do you imagine that stack of bills would be if it were $1 trillion? It would be 63 miles high. Yeah. Imagine you make $40,000 a year, Lee Camp goes on to say. How long would it take for you to make just $1 trillion? Well, don't sign up for the task because it would take you 25 million years. Now, he says that sounds like a long time, but I hear that the last 10 million really fly by because you already know your way around the office, where the office coffee machine is, etc. That's Lee Camp. He's one of these progressive political commentators. I mean, it goes all the way back to to Lenny Bruce and, Dick Gregory and, even Jon Stewart to a certain extent. Now you've got these progressive comedians that really have a great way of putting these things in context because of their comedy. It makes you want to follow along. Jimmy Dore is really good at that as well. Well, and it has to do a lot with the news of the day, Brian, because we hear about exponential growth or exponential problems, like climate crisis as an example, as opposed to linear. And the difference is, and the coronavirus is proving this also, linear is 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 3, 3 becomes, nah, This is an exponential problem that we have with this money lending and the impact that it has on our society and the benefits to the wealthiest and how the poor don't get their fair share. And they're going to get $1,200. They're going to get unemployment insurance, which was extended a couple of months. But it's mostly a top-down program, just like 2008.
Right. And the problem with the $1,200, sure, fine, right? It completely misses the point. All these other countries are sending checks to people so that they are comfortable and able to go about their lives and pay their bills and stay home. That's how we're going to beat this thing. The $1,200, like you said, was kind of a here, have something, and now go over there while we take all this money. It's been pointed out, and I think this is the best thing about this whole situation, is people are starting to realize all the money that's going into banks and the financial sector and corporations, and they're just sinking it into a black hole. But we keep on getting told we can't have health care, that's too expensive. We can't cancel student debt because that's too expensive. The Fed ended up putting the same amount of money into the black hole of the stock market as it was sinking in one day. It could have wiped out all student debt in this entire country, given everybody a fresh start. There would have been nothing better than that for our economy. But they decided to throw it into the stock market. $500 billion to be used at the president's discretion. That's a third. I mean, all this money that's getting sunk into this black hole of the 1% should be going into our infrastructure and should be going into helping us as a whole, as a society. I'm hoping that it takes the cover off more the longer we go. There's still a lot of people out there that seem to have blinders on, though. It's like, well, this is necessary. What about people's retirements? What if these companies go under? What if those companies go under? Well, I don't know. Maybe they should stop buying so many lattes. Maybe they should cut back on the avocado toast, put some money back, few months, 6 months. They should save a little bit instead of enriching themselves and enriching their stockholders and their executives with all this money that we're giving them.
Well, this was I call it a 5-finger death punch for progressives. And you must have thought it was a kick in the teeth, a punch in the gut. I don't know what you want to describe it. But my God, I'm watching these presidential debates and I'm watching Joe Biden tell us that we can't afford Medicare for all. What do we need right now with this coronavirus? It's Medicare for all. One of the biggest reasons is they're projecting unemployment could reach 30%. People in this country get their health care from their employers. How's that going to work, folks? You didn't want Medicare for all? You may want it when you think about unemployment benefits that you need, but you're going to need health care. But we can't afford that. Who else says that? Pelosi and Schumer. My God, Biden told us that if Medicare for all were to pass the House and the Senate, which it won't, but if it were, he'd veto it. And during every debate, every time he gets a chance to go at Bernie, he asks him how you're going to pay for it. Well, maybe you just create the money. Obviously, they're capable of doing that when they want to bail out Wall Street. And by the way, what you're talking about has been going on for some time. People haven't been following this in the news. I've mentioned it in my podcast. But the New York Fed has been bailing out Wall Street and the financial market with trillions of dollars for about 9 months now. And they started this, they've got their own financial package separate from this bailout in the trillions of dollars. And of course, this is to benefit corporations and businesses. They want to put the money at the top and then they want to trickle it down to the rest of us, which of course never happens. I was watching Jim Cramer on CNBC, Brian. He said the net result of this is because of the benefit to the largest corporations and the oligarchs, the captains of industry in this country, we may come out of this with only 3 retailers. Now, Cramer, he's kind of prone to bombast, but, that would be Walmart, Costco, and Amazon. So any small business people that are jumping up and down with some perceived benefit that they see getting from this, maybe not.
No, they're not. They're not going to get much of anything, and they need the help more than anything. Economic diversity is very important, and that's one thing that we need to keep in mind as the markets and everything crashes. This is one big consolidation, just like it was in 2008, just like it was in the 90s. This is all something for the big fish to swallow up the little fish. And we're going to end up in a monopoly sort of situation. We've got robber barons currently. We need to address them the same way, if not better than we did in the early 20th century. We need a Roosevelt. I don't care right now if it's Franklin or Teddy, but we need somebody like that, and we don't have either in Biden or in Trump. That's for dang sure. It's frustrating to me because of the fact that we have Senator Sanders, who is putting out all these things and working so hard for the American people right now. And honestly, every day he's doing podcasts, he's doing roundtables, he's promoting how this is affecting the working people in this country. And he's getting ignored. Everybody's paying attention to Cuomo, but all the information is with the guy that the news doesn't want to give any airtime to because, oh my God, he might become president. He's exactly what we need right now. So I don't know exactly where we're going to be heading after this. There's lots of rumors of general strikes. I know that there's a couple of major corporations that have rumblings. Instacart is apparently planning a massive strike at the end of the month. I'm hearing rent strikes everywhere. This is going to be a very interesting April 1st. It's going to be interesting to see how this all pans out, because once the bills come due, that's when we're going to see how the way that this is all going to be going.
Well, and you mentioned Cuomo. Again, it goes with the peeling back the onion. I mean, I don't follow New York politics a lot. I do have people from New York on the podcast. And Cuomo was kind of out in front on this, and he's opposed to Trump, and he looks good. But as a presidential candidate, he ain't a progressive. Brian would agree with that too. They've got the same issue in New York that we've got here. He's cut Medicaid in that state, which at a time when they need it the most, and he's not wanting to tax the wealthiest people in his state either. And I mean, it goes on and on. So okay, Cuomo's good, maybe dealing with this for the people of New York, but don't take it too much beyond that. I mean, I certainly get that as well, and I'm glad to hear you mention FDR and Teddy Roosevelt. And instead, again, we got the neo-libs saying, "Boy, this is great. This is a great time to have Obamacare." And I'm like, "Oh my God, Obamacare! We got to get beyond that, folks. We got to get to Medicare for all." Like again, 30% of Americans don't have any health insurance at all. 80% are underinsured under the current Obamacare plan. I don't know how many of our Republican brethren wouldn't participate in it if you held a gun to their head, because the Republicans tacked the name Obama on it. I mean, that sounds silly, but I mean, honest to God, that's the truth. And it isn't enough. And when I looked at this bailout bill, I thought, okay, here we go. Let's get Medicare in the hands of people. Medicare for all. Let's go with the UBI. I mean, Yang, whatever you think of him, we do understand that a little bit now because of his presidential candidacy. Let's have loan forgiveness. Let's have free education. Now as progressives, let's solidify. Let's have solidarity. Let's say, you guys, when you have a crisis, you want to run to us. This is what we want. This is where we're going to stand. And I wish to hell Bernie had filibustered that. A filibuster. I wish he'd done that in the Senate and stop this thing, at least for a period of time, so that we could peel back the onion and take a look at it. Now, Brian, you understand these things better than I do because you're more involved in the legislative process, but why couldn't they do two bills? Why couldn't they have one for the Wall Street financial element of this, the corporation part of this, and then have a second bill for more immediate needs for people? Get that one passed. Because everybody supposedly agreed on that. At least call the Republicans bluff on it. They supposedly wanted to help Americans. Okay, let's do that. Then let's turn our attention to this other component, because when you mix the two together, you always get this rotten, everlasting, long-term benefit to corporatism in America and short-term, immediate spin the gold watch in front of the American people's eyes, and like we got in 2008.
I think the main reason for that is they were going to pass the corporate bailout regardless, and the one for immediate need in this country for the working people of this country wouldn't have gone anywhere. It would have gotten held up. They would have played politics with it. They would have batted it back and forth. The neoliberals in both the Democrat and the Republican Party would have had a field day with it. It's an election year, and they would have just spent the entire time pointing fingers saying they're the reason why it's not getting passed. The reason why Sanders didn't filibuster it is he saw that this corporate bailout was going to pass regardless. They really wanted this money, and so he used that at least to his advantage to get something passed that actually helped the 3 million people that just filed for unemployment, and probably double that once this thing goes into effect, because this now includes self-employed gig workers, people that didn't used to have this sort of protection. So this was something that actually addressed an immediate need. And when Graham grandstanded and tried to offer an amendment to strip it out, he said, okay, if you do that, I'm going to start tacking on stuff and holding up this $500 billion you guys want so bad. We can't keep on doing that. That's going to eventually catch up with us. But Sanders is the amendment king. He was the guy that was able to tack this on and say, look, you're going to tack this on or else I'm going to hold up the rest of this. And I know you guys really, really want this bill passed. So here's my little crumb that I'm attaching here. Let's actually do something for the working people. And you say neoliberalism, a lot of people are confused by that word. A lot of people don't understand it. And it's Reaganomics is what it is. That's essentially what neoliberalism is. It is a philosophy that came out that rose to prominence in the 70s. A lot of economists tacked their name onto it because we were in dire economic straits, and they had to make a decision: either keep on going with the way things are going, or go for a fast recovery, but that would increase income inequality. They went with neoliberalism. We got a neoliberal hero in the Republican Party. That was Ronald Reagan. A lot of people don't realize Bill Clinton was a neoliberal hero in the Democratic Party. And he's who made it palatable to the Democratic Party. And we've been on this train ever since. And not just here in the United States, worldwide. But neoliberalism is collapsing worldwide, and we are still hanging on to it here in this country for some god-awful reason.
And the neoliberalism, neocon also, in my mind, identifies and refers to warmongering. And that's the other thing about this spinning watch that I was talking about with the coronavirus and this bailout bill and all that type of thing. Everybody's taking a look at that. Keep your eye off to the side on Pompeo and Trump, because they're going to use, and they are using, this crisis and this bill as a diversion to go out and do things to these other countries, Iran in particular. I mean, Venezuela, you're seeing that in the news now. They're running around and they're doing these things while we're transfixed, while we're hypnotized. I call it being a hypnotized chicken by the spinning watch that they hold in front of us. They do that all the time. That's how they got Obamacare passed in 2008 with it, which was basically Romney care. Got it passed the way the Republicans wanted it, because we were dealing with that crisis at that time, and they kind of snuck that thing in. Anyway. And I've run out of time. God, look at my watch. I'm out of time already. Brian, I want to give you the last word on this. Again, I want people to stay vigilant. There's, the Congress is going to be back in session here, hopefully, when they can get back in there. There's still a possibility for some follow-up legislation on this. We need to stay vigilant. We need to have solidarity. And when we get an opportunity to get back out and do something, because our elected leaders don't seem to be representing the needs of the workers, we're going to have to get in the street eventually on this, folks. We're going to have to go out. We're going to have to carry signs. We're going to have to protest. In my lifetime, and I'm getting to be an old man, that's the only thing that I've ever seen that works. And it worked with the Vietnam War in particular. I go back that far. To get these things that we want, you're not going to like the outcome of this election in November if we have one, I don't think, folks. I mean, I don't think we're going to be very happy with the way that this results. The only thing we've got is us. Bernie says that all the time. It's not me, it's us. And we're going to have to do that. That's my closing comment. Brian, what do you say?
Well, I know I talk about Bernie an awful lot, but I would, first of all, we do need to get out in the streets. But I think the first thing that we need to do at this point in time is figure out a way to stay home.
Oh, yeah.
We cannot die for Wall Street, period. That is not, your life is worth more than Wall Street's gains. I don't care what anybody says.
Well said.
If you are comfortable and able to, I hope that eventually, they'll be able to figure out ways to get more money to workers so that they can stay home and safe, and we can beat this coronavirus thing, dead in its tracks. I would have to say, honestly, look, while you're all at home, take a look around at what's going on currently in this country and see the level of empowerment that has risen just over the past few months. You have people organizing tenant unions. You have, workers that are not protected by a union currently going on strike. You've got wildcat strikes. You've got people just staying home and consolidating their power. That's how we're going to beat this thing. And there's only so much that Sanders and Ocasio-Cortez and the squad can do. They're fighting their hearts out with whatever they can right now. But it's up to us to band together in solidarity. I mean, I'm a union guy. I've been a union guy for 12 years now. Unions saved my life, saved me from poverty. And I know how solidarity can make a difference in people's lives and make a difference in this country. And as long as we stick together, band together, fight together in solidarity, we're going to win this thing. We're going to beat this thing, whether Sanders ends up getting the White House or not. We got to keep the fight going. This is more than a campaign. This is a revolution, and it's going to keep going.
Attaboy, Brian. That's I like that. I mean, that's great. And really, I like having you on here because, like I said, my God, you can go to MSNBC, you can go to CNN, you can go to Fox. You're going to see neo-lib to neocon. You're going to see that Overton window that they talk about. You're going to see the between the goalpost conversations. I mean, that's everywhere. Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post. It's all the Overton window. It's all between the goalposts. And by the way, they've shifted since the 80s, as Brian mentioned. That all started with Ronald Reagan. We've gone to the right with this. And this discussion is all over here. If you want to see the discussion on the progressive side of things, you got to go to alternative independent media. You got to go to things like this. You got to go to Podcast by George, and you got to go to Brian McLean with the Progressive Voice of Iowa. Brian, thanks again for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks, George. Thanks for having me on.
We'll come back to you again. I know we will. I mean, I really enjoyed this. That's Brian McLean, folks, and that's another podcast by George.